glad everyone back after a wonderful holiday. I hope everyone had a chance to chill out a little bit and just kind of relax and reflect. Hello, Houghton.
No,
hello,
I mean
Stacy. They don't hear me. Maybe they can see me. I'd also like to take this opportunity very quickly, and then Amanda's going to do a more comprehensive introduction, but Barry Dahl will be doing our presentation today. There are two parts to the presentation. The first part will be focusing on quality of online education, and then the second part will be focusing on technology. So Barry brings a lot of experience, so we're delighted to have him, and I'll let Amanda do more, and then we'll see you guys later on. I'll be in the back.
All right, well, thanks for coming back. This is sort of a continuation of what we started on Tuesday. I'm pleased to introduce Barry Dahl. He's a former instructor at Lake Superior College where he instructed accounting. He was there for 6 years as accounting instructor, and how many years as chief technology officer? 10 years as chief technology officer. So he oversaw the web, the tech center, e-learning, distance education primarily. And prior to that, he taught for about a total of 11 years at Arizona State University, Florida Atlantic University, and UND in Duluth. So he's got extensive background in instruction and technology, and he's here with us today. We're happy to have him. So I'm going to turn it over to Barry Dahl.
Thanks, Amanda. We'll see if you really mean it. All right, well, it is my pleasure to be here with you. The part that Amanda left out was the reason that I'm no longer at Lake Superior College. But I was there for a total of 15 years, as she mentioned, faculty first, and then administrator in charge of kind of all things technology. But we got a new president back in the summer of not 11, that was last year, summer of 2010. And 5 months later, 4 vice president positions went away, and mine was one of those. And so all the other people have kind of landed at another college doing very similar work, but I decided I didn't quite want to do that yet. And so I've been doing this kind of thing, traveling around and, well, sometimes working from home as well. But consulting and speaking engagements and just trying to really work on professional development opportunities with different colleges. And I do tend to specialize with two-year schools. When I was at Lake Superior, that was my first experience at a two-year school, at a community college. And, well, it was my second experience. Growing up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, there was a community college there, and once I went out and played tennis on their outdoor tennis courts. So that was my first experience with a community college, but that was it. And so first time that I started teaching at the two-year school, it was so different than the big universities I'd been to that I wasn't sure it was going to work. And that was back on the quarter system, so that was 95, 96 wintertime. And by the end of that first quarter, there was no place else I wanted to be. That was so much better for making a difference in people who, at least the majority of them, cared whether you made a difference. I realized I hadn't quite felt that at some of the great big universities. There were other reasons too, but I do consider myself to be a two-year guy. All right, so as was mentioned, we're gonna kind of split this up. We're gonna take a break probably in around 10:30-ish, so we'll take a 15, 20-minute break, whatever we need at that time. First part of this, we're gonna talk about quality, and the second part, I'm doing kind of a combination of a couple of different presentations I do about using technology in teaching, and I will just tell you that it's probably gonna be more fun in the second half than it is in the first half. And so, yeah, come back after the break, I guess, is the point of that. So we're going to start off, I hope we're going to start off. Yep, here we go. First of all, I have several different websites, but if you remember my name, you can find me online, Barry Dahl, so just barrydahl.com. And all of my presentation materials I share freely. Anybody can get their hands on anything. There's other information there as well. This is a site I've had for quite some time. Then I have some others, like this business I'm running now. I call it Excellence in E-Education. So that's another website. That one is just really more trying to show what services I can provide. But barrydahl.com is much more about teaching with technology, e-learning, and things like that. So you can find me online and any of this stuff that we're going to talk about. But I want you to start off talking a little bit. And so forget about quality in online education. Let's just look at that word quality by itself. Who wants to try to give us a definition? What's the word quality typically mean? Doesn't have to be a dictionary definition, but what's it mean to you? Who wants to play?
Excellence.
All right. Just like my business name, excellence in the education. All right. What else?
A set of standards.
Standards. Yeah, so you can identify whether you are performing at an excellent level or not. Against what standard? Good. What else? That's not bad. Go ahead.
Good value.
All right. Actually, I think you may have hit three of the most important points here. Now this comes from, I think, dictionary.com. I should have cited it, but I'm pretty sure it was dictionary.com. Just some of the kind of like one of the top level definitions, and it's really just kind of some sort of keywords for quality. They do talk about high grade, about superiority, about excellence. Don't lose the value piece though, even though it's not specifically in here, it's still coming. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. What about quality in manufacturing? Not quality in education, quality in manufacturing. Anybody teach in a manufacturing type of area or anything like that, or just what are some of the quality attributes or things that you would identify if you're looking for quality in manufacturing? Sorry? Consistency. Yes. Oversight? All right. What else?
Measurability.
All right.
Quality.
That's the word. Well, ISO, which strangely enough stands for the International Organization for Standardization, which sounds to me like iOS, but it's ISO. And you go to their logo, it says ISO, International Organization for Standardization. So whatever, that's not too standardized as far as I can tell. But this is what they say. They define quality as the totality of features and characteristics of a product or service that bears its ability to satisfy stated or implied needs. How do you like that?
Legalese.
Say what?
Sounds like legalese.
It does, doesn't it? Well, this is another definition of manufacturing. So a measure of the excellence or a state of being free from defects, deficiencies, and significant variations, brought about by the strict and consistent adherence to measurable and verifiable standards to achieve uniformity of output that satisfies specific customer or user requirements. A bit of a mouthful, probably a lot more specific than the first one. I mean, I think it is a lot more specific than the first one. Probably not a definition that we'd want to apply to education, right? Talking about defects, variances, variations, and things like that. I mean, we do expect our students to be different, right? We do expect that not only do they come to us in different situations, they're going to leave us in different situations. It's not a manufacturing type of definition. But it's definitions like this that I think cause problems in the conversation about quality in education. Because a lot of the word tends to make educators kind of squeamish in the first place. Kind of, ew, not sure I like that word, quality. But you have to kind of get used to it, don't you? I mean, you are an AQUIP school, right? The Q in AQUIP? Quality, right? So if our accrediting bodies are focusing on quality, then I guess we need to as well. So let's move beyond the manufacturing definition and bring it right into education. How many of the things you already mentioned do you want to continue to use now when we're talking about quality in education?
Standards.
Standards.
Measurability.
All right. Standards and measurability against those standards. What else? Let's stop for that a second though. Think about some other features. But on the standards piece, where do those standards come from? Who sets the standards?
The market.
The market of colleges, the market of student demand.
The economy. I mean, if
The
you're in a
economy.
nursing program, you have to, the market has standards.
All right, so see now, that's a good example, the nursing program, she says, but you teach psychology, or you teach English. Where's that similar market for you? Probably isn't a similar market for you, right? Again, what we're going to find out is clearly, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. because things that we do in this college are very different. Many different things are different from one another, all right? So there was another, somebody else had another feature of quality in education.
Performance, being able to do something after you come out.
Okay, so what would we call that?
Outcomes.
Yeah, it is an outcome-based type of thing, but the students, which would be, your graduates, and we'll use the manufacturer, like your output, all right? Your graduates are expected to be able to do something when they leave. Have any of you read or heard enough about the book Academically Adrift? I actually have it in my backpack. But Academically Adrift has got quite a bit of news a little over a year ago, I think, maybe a year and a half at the most, when it was published. And it's measuring the amount of, quote, learning in the first 2 years of bachelor's degree students, for the most part, so at 4-year schools, but the first 2 years, trying to measure the amount that they've learned from, it's in critical thinking, it's in problem solving, I think it's kind of 3 areas, but writing is a big piece of it. And that how much they've improved in their first 2 years, and what the researchers who wrote the book basically say, there's almost none. With obvious exceptions, but across the board, there's almost no evidence that they're improving their skills whatsoever in the first couple of years. All right, well, they're trying to measure learning. There's lots of quarrels about how they're trying to measure learning, but they're trying to measure learning, and even though they're not looking at the grads going out, the same kind of thing could be applied. Is to our, in the nursing program, you have some very, specific outcomes they have to be able to achieve. They have to be able to do certain things to be a successful graduate of the program. You know that. Then you get in some of the other areas, and it's a lot harder to measure those types of things. Anything else? Quality in education. What's another term we want to think about, if any? Well, here's a couple of pieces I picked out of the literature. High standards, consistently applied, that's come up before, with efficiency or value for money also came up. Now, if you research quality in education, you'll find a lot of stuff. And it seems like the mid-90s were really prolific for writers and researchers and the like to be talking about quality in education. So you'll find a lot of stuff from that time frame. You'll find newer stuff too, but there's really quite a bit of it. So here's one. This is actually from the UK, but it gets cited a lot. From 1994, somebody named Green, whoever. But this is what he has to say. I'll read this nice texty slide to you. Quality is a relative concept. Different interest groups or stakeholders in higher education have different priorities, and their focus of attention may be different. The best that can be achieved is to define as clearly as possible the criteria that each stakeholder uses when judging quality, and for these competing views to be taken into account when assessments of quality are undertaken. What's that really saying?
That there isn't anything.
Kind of. Right? That, yeah, there's a quality thing out there, but it's all relative. Depends on who you are and what you're looking for, and, okay, there you go. Set some sort of standard and then try to figure out if it meets that standard, depending on what your point of view is, what your need is, all of that kind of thing. This is considered to be probably one of the top definitions of quality in education. And I think you can make an argument that it really doesn't say much of anything.
No.
So it's kind of a tough nut to crack, right? Well, in online ed, and let's just do a little raise of hands, if you are involved in online education, especially if you teach anything online, e-learning type thing, or even blended. All right, so some of you yes, but some of you no. Chances are those of you who are involved in online ed are aware of the fact that this word in online ed, this is absolutely one of the hottest topics in the field and has been for several years, the idea of quality in e-learning. And so, is it a different definition? Is it somehow not the same thing as what we were talking about with, quality in all education? Does making it online change the concept of quality? I heard it no.
Not the outcome.
Say it again.
Not the outcomes.
You better hope it doesn't change the outcomes much. I mean, if you're achieving the outcomes you want, anyway, you know, in the what? Sure. And then we're typically, we might as well face facts. We're typically comparing online education with traditional face-to-face education. Okay. So if you're getting the outcomes you want in a traditional face-to-face environment, then you better be getting the outcomes that you want in the online environment, or there's problems. There may not be. There may be other problems, but that would be one. That would be a big one.
If we can't define it on site, how are you going to?
Yeah, you know, maybe it's not a question of whether that you can't define it, but you can't necessarily come up with a definition that everybody's going to agree with. So everybody can define it. We just may not want to accept that as the generally accepted definition. Well, but they are, I'd say, trying to do that. Have you heard of something called Quality Matters?
Yes.
If you're involved in online ed, there's a good chance you've heard of Quality Matters. Quality Matters started with a consortium known as Maryland Online. Maryland Online is made up of not all, but most of the public schools in the state of Maryland. And they got a FIPSI grant back in, I believe it was 2003. So I can't remember, it's like $600,000 or something like that, but they got a decent-sized FIPSI grant to develop this Quality Matters rubric and program or process to evaluate quality of online courses. And that's what they did. And so it was a 3-year FIPSI grant where they developed both the rubric, and we'll talk a little bit about rubrics here coming up, as well as a peer review process for online courses. And because it was a FIPSI grant, they had to share it. And so they had to share that information during at least the first 3 years of this process. At the time I was at Lake Superior College, and I attended in February of 2004, I attended the ITC conference, and they did, these people from Maryland did a pre-conference workshop. And when they had just finished rubric version 1 of their rubric, and they had just kind of established what their peer review process would be, and they were doing a workshop telling us all about it. Well, because it was a FIPSI grant, at the end of the workshop they said, so we have to share this stuff. Anybody who'd like to take it, use it, adapt it, whatever, feel free. I said, well, I'm kind of interested. I don't know for sure, but I brought it back to LSC, and at the end of that semester, so in May, we had a 2-day online faculty retreat, and we kind of picked it apart. We took a look at it, and as a group, they decided that yes, this was something they wanted to do. And so really the 2004-2005 school year, 5 or 6, but I think 5 faculty members and myself worked on adapting that Quality Matters rubric for use at Lake Superior College. So that for that year of 2000, I said 2005 to 6. It would have been 2004-2005 is when that work happened. And so in the spring of 2005, they had tested this peer review process. They had tweaked and adapted the rubric, and as a group, they felt pretty comfortable with it. And I was the administrator in charge of online learning. But what I wanted to do, and what I think turned out to be a good idea, was to get out of the process at that point. We got to the point where it was ready to go to a broader faculty audience, and let it be a faculty-driven process. And to this date, it still is. And so that's really from about 2005 to today that they have been doing this peer review course design rubric at LSC. And the faculty members who've been involved with it from the beginning will say the exact same thing I'm going to say. In fact, I've heard them say this in several different workshops and things. It's the best professional development thing they've ever been engaged in. And that's, as the reviewers of other courses, it's the best professional development thing they've ever been engaged in. For the reviewees, it's been good, generally. It's been good. But even for the reviewers, there were all kinds of benefits that they didn't see coming about how much they learned from working with their colleagues on this type of thing. So, I set the stage with that to tell you that I'm a fan of what they've done with Quality Matters. Or at least I'm a fan of what they did with Quality Matters. Then when the grant was over, it became a business. And now it's pretty much all about money. And I understand that, money's important. But they have a little different approach in how they handle Quality Matters today. But LSC and quite a few other schools that I'm familiar with are still doing their own thing based on the early work that Quality Matters did, but they're not kind of beholden to the Quality Matters current business practices. So this is a little clicker. We're going to use clickers in the second half because I've got a lot of different things, but this is one I've used for about 4 years now, and when I go to conferences, especially e-learning conferences, where pretty much everybody in the room knows about Quality Matters and that sort of thing. And so the question of, it's kind of a long-winded question here, or statement, but it says that by using things like Quality Matters, we're sufficiently addressing the questions of quality in online education. And that 60-40 break is about what this has been over the 4 years that I've used this question. And about 60% of people say, yep, this whole thing about Quality Matters is really getting to the core of what quality means in online education. And 40% say, no, I'm not ready to go that far yet. And actually what's happened in these years is that the shift has happened from what used to be stronger on the reality side of this, saying, yes, Quality Matters is the bomb when it comes to quality. And it's been shifting to a lot more people down below, saying, no, it's not everything, it's not enough when it comes to that. And that's where I stand, and that's why I picked this out in the first place. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Quality Matters, I think you'll know a little bit more about it here shortly. And I would argue that it's not in and of itself sufficient to really take a look at what we mean by quality in online education. It does look at quality of course design. And I would argue that course design is important, but if you kind of take the little three-legged stool example, it's just one of those legs. And probably not the most important thing. And so those three legs that we're going to talk about a little bit, that purple's kind of hard to see, sorry about that. It looks fine here, but on the projector's rather dark. But looking at three aspects of quality in online ed, and you could probably drop the word online, because it's probably really no different in the regular classroom. But we're going to talk about the quality of the learning that's happening, the quality of the teaching that's happening, and the quality of course design. And you do course design in a face-to-face course as well. It's just a little different the way you do it than you do online. But I would still argue that those are three, not the only three, but three important components of quality. All right, so this is the ideal case. You have evidence that the learning is happening at the level you expected, that students are achieving the outcomes. So through assessments, whatever, you have, I'll say proof, but we just generally call it some sort of evidence that the students are learning what they're supposed to learn. Good. We have some sort of process at most schools, with a few exceptions, some sort of performance evaluation process of faculty work, and so we want to see that there's a high level of teaching going on. And I use the word teaching and teacher quite a bit. That's one thing I found that when I tried to use that word at a big university, I was told I shouldn't say that. You know, oh, you're not a teacher. In fact, this happened one time. I was making a little extra money as an umpire in the city leagues at night, and so in between games, the umpire I was assigned with, who I knew who he was a big physical education professor at Arizona State. I'd known him for I'd known who he was for years. He didn't know who I was. So in between games, we're sitting there and he goes, so what do you do? And I said, well, I teach. He goes, oh yeah. And of course, he immediately thinks I'm teaching K-12. And he goes, yeah, what do you teach? And I go, accounting. He goes, really? Accounting? You know, because how much do they teach accounting in K-12? And he goes, where do you teach? And I said, at ASU. He goes, you're not a teacher. Well, you're a professor. And I said, yeah, okay, whatever, buddy. You know, if that makes you happy, you can go with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with being a teacher. So I'll use that word quite a bit. It seems to me like professing level is high, just doesn't quite sound right. And then we've got the one over here on course design, and something like Quality Matters would be an assessment, an evaluation technique to determine if you have course design that's meeting your standards. But this is the ideal case. You know, it's kind of positive in all three of these cases. All right, so obviously you could have this little scenario. And I know there's more than three, but I think these three tend to capture a whole lot of what's going on in the course. So you say, yeah, this faculty member is doing everything he or she can. and the course is designed up to standards, no problem there. Students aren't learning what they're supposed to learn. Problem? Quality? You know, you tell me that you've got a quality course, but this is the situation, I'm going to argue with you. Now, there can be reasons for this that are, you know, no fault of the other good things that are going on here, right? For example? Well, yeah, okay, so you know, student performance and attendance and things like that just isn't up to snuff. Okay, well, yeah, we know that those things happen, but overall, across the board, students aren't getting it. First of all, this is the one that the naysayers of online learning just believe is the case. Whether there's any evidence or not, this is what they think. Because it's online, students aren't going to learn. They're not going to learn as much or as enough, whatever you want to call it there, as they would if it was in a face-to-face environment. If that's true, this should be kind of the death knell for online ed. Say students just can't learn. You know, that would be a problem. Now, there's not really evidence to show that that is the case across the board, but there are some people who don't care whether there's the evidence; they just believe it. You know, I don't think it could possibly be done, so therefore, and you know, I always like to say, well, yeah, I agree, you probably can't do it because of, you know, with that coming in with that preconceived notion, then chances are you're not going to be able to do it well, but others are. But then something that's not, you know, the death knell for online learning. Do you teach in a program where there's sequence of courses, or just courses that require a certain, you know, I mean, the college level reading and writing is a good example. You have students who place into your courses and just are underprepared to be there. And is it sometimes a big problem, not a little problem? Chances are good that that's happened at some point along the line. Fabulous instructor, well-designed course. Students are not capable because of breakdowns in that process that even gets them in the course in the first place. And you can come up with a couple other scenarios. But you know, this is still a situation that if the students are not achieving the outcomes, you know, quality is a problem. Solving this problem depends on why they aren't achieving the outcomes. And there can be lots of reasons for that. All right, so what about this one? My question up there, is this a problem? Do we have a quality problem here? Students are learning what they're supposed to learn. Faculty member is performing at a high level. Course design doesn't meet standards. You okay with that?
No, just
No,
the
because
content could be.
what the students are learning may not be what's actually needed.
Well, no, that's what this is saying, is that they are achieving the expected outcomes at a high level.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what the intent is here.
It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's my take on this too. Now remember that this is that course design, quality matters kind of thing, the focus on how, you know, how the course is constructed. Students are learning at a high level and the faculty member is teaching at a high level. I'm good with that. Because what can happen, it doesn't always happen, but what there is a potential, if there's too much focus down in that lower right corner, you know, some of the terms that come to mind, oh, it's a cookie cutter, you know, everything has to be exactly this way, can't ever do something different, out of the box thinking, blah, blah, blah. All right, that's a danger if you focus too much down here. Because there are usually more ways to achieve your outcome than, you know, one or two. And so in this type of scenario, if the students are achieving the outcomes that we expect them to achieve and the faculty member is performing at a high level, I think I'm willing to give up that third one. Because they might very well have developed their own approach that doesn't quite fit the little rubric. And that's what that thing is. Does it fit the rubric? Well, the point of that being is that when they talk about quality matters as the end-all be-all of quality, you know, I'm going to argue with that. There are more ways that these things can be done. I'd still say that, you know, if it has some good design principles, that can lead to those other two being positive, but it's not by no means is it a sure thing that that would happen. All right, well, just, you can kind of get the gist here, so let's get into this one. There's not much evidence that the instructor is performing at a high level. But students are learning, and the course is nicely designed. And in online learning, what sometimes we talk about, and I know it's actually in the instructional manual that Amanda put together, the idea of instructor presence. And it's not even just how much interactivity there is with the instructor and the students and that sort of thing, but you can have basically what I would call an electronic correspondence course, or online independent study, or whatever you want to call it, where the course is set up and maybe beautifully designed course. And in some cases, and I would argue it's a minority, it's a small small set of courses that students could learn, good content, kind of proper assessments. I mean, students have learned by independent study or by correspondence courses for over 100 years. It's possible. Can it be done online? Absolutely, it can be done online. The question is whether that's what you want. And I know at Lake Superior College and many of the colleges I work with, that's not what they want. That's just not the kind of learning that they're trying to promote, is basically an online correspondence course. But it can be done. And if that's your goal, I would say you're probably achieving it in that case. Students are achieving the outcomes they have, and it's because you have a really nicely designed correspondence course. But unless that's your goal, that's probably not what you want. You still want the faculty member to be involved, to be engaged, and to be performing at a high level. Most of the time, that's, I think, what we're after. Here's the other side of the Quality Matters issue. The most beautifully designed course ever. 100% on the rubric. Faculty member doesn't teach, students don't learn. But if that's your measure of quality, you say, well, this is our highest quality course. Scores the best. Is that what we want? Pretty sure it's not what we want. So the point of all that is, as useful as good course design can be, these other two things are much more important. So it doesn't make it unimportant. It just means that the other two things are even more important. That one, and then what I call the triple lick, which we don't have any evidence of quality of any kind in that, would be to start over. Well, some of those definitions of quality, I think, kind of come down to this, and most people would never accept this. When you're talking about quality, well, I know it when I see it. Like, well, that's kind of the gist of it for me. Now, it's not that I go into that decision totally uninformed. Go back to these three triangles. Course design is, I know a portion of it, but not the end-all, be-all. Students achieving outcomes is a big portion of it. Not the end-all, be-all, but maybe at the top of the list anyway. Faculty performing at a high level, I know that's important. And you can throw in a few other smaller factors as well. But it's not a one size or one scenario always works kind of thing. So it is kind of I know it when I see it, based on all of those different possible combinations of factors that go on there. So when they try to nail it down and say this will lead to quality learning, they're kind of fudging on that a little bit. But there are things, what I typically call effective practices. And I'm just kind of starting. If you go to my blog, that's the most recent post. It says, no more best practices. And I know that that's a term that's used a lot. It's even used in your manual. I'm not trying to pick on you. But there's no best. It just isn't. I mean, best actually means something, and the way we use it, it doesn't mean anything. And so I talk about effective practices, of which there can be many effective practices. There should only be one best, good, better, best. But still, there's many different ways to do that, and I think the more you learn about effective online teaching, the types of learning assessments that lead to outcome achievement, and good course design, as well as a few other things, technology and other things, you can have a combination of effective practices that has a high quality course. And everything I said there, you could, I think, apply in a face-to-face environment. I don't think that there's that much different. It looks different because it's online, on a screen, whatever. All right. So let's stop there for a second. What else are your thoughts about this question of quality? What did I say that you're in least agreement with? Or most agreement, if you will.
I personally have a problem with the course design not being rated high, but there's still being a lot of high learning outcomes, high teaching outcomes. If were rated low on a rubric, but my students were still doing well, performing well, I don't feel that I would be at ease with that.
Okay, well, I thought you were going a different place with that, but let's come to that one exactly, Amanda. It's in here somewhere, right here. One of the problems with this is how you use that rubric. When it's used, how it's used. Now, I mentioned at LSC where we've used it, they used it, I'm not part of that we anymore, but they've used it for about 7 years now. It's not a hammer. It is not some sort of at all any kind of a punishment type of thing. To use the term, it's kind of a quality improvement process. Okay, and so the faculty work together in areas where they see that course design could be improved. So it's oftentimes, in fact, we recommended that it not even be used until a course had been taught once or twice, because you learn so much at the very beginning of those types of things. But there are schools that use it much more as a roadblock to online teaching. And a brand newly designed course has to pass the rubric before it will ever be offered. Huh. So this scenario wouldn't happen at that school, where students are learning and the faculty members performing at a high level, but it doesn't match the rubric, because the course would never see the light of day because it doesn't match the rubric. I have the same problem. So the design rubric being used as a hammer, I think, produces the wrong kind of behavior and the wrong kind of outcomes for faculty and students and everybody else. But believe me, that does happen in some places. So that's what I mean by it depends on how you use these tools, kind of when you use these tools, and whether they are more roadblocks or more of an improvement type of process. What else?
Might that matter, when you say learning level is high, if your course design is at or above standards, wouldn't that mean that learning level could be higher?
Say it again. If the design was at or below?
In this scenario, you've
Yep.
got, learning level is high.
Right. We have evidence that students are learning what they're supposed to learn.
Right.
So go on. I missed your question. I'm sorry.
So if the course design was above standards, or at standards or whatever, had a high, wouldn't the learning level be higher?
Not necessarily. Now I do totally understand your question. I was just slow getting there. My fault. Well, okay. I can see where that makes sense on the surface. I don't really think that there's necessarily evidence of that. And that's actually one of the problems with all of this stuff, is getting real hard evidence on most of this kind of thing. I mean, what's good teaching performance or activity?
Well, because it's so subjective.
It's totally
What may work
subjective.
for one student might not work for another.
Absolutely right. But even the same thing, I mean, because you don't ever have the chance for a do-over, right? So you had your group of 20 students, and you had the course design that you had, and the students achieved at a high level. Good. Now the argument is, yes, but if my design was better, wouldn't they have achieved at an even higher level? I don't know. Sounds kind of good, but I don't know that that's the case at all. And there's no real good way that I know of to prove it either. You're going to have a different batch of students the next time around, and so different aptitudes, different all kinds of things. So it's really squishy. It goes back to that, I know it when I see it, and it depends kind of answer on whether you have quality or not. Now, I'm not saying that this is my preferred scenario. My preferred scenario is that very first one. That's what I want most. But close to most is anything that includes this. Typically, it's going to include this, because again, if you're not doing that correspondence, non-faculty interaction type of thing, it's going to include this too. But if I get the one at the top, I'm the happiest I'm going to be. But, well, maybe that's not true. That's maybe I will be happy. Then I'll get happier, and happiest would be better to say if I have those other ones involved. So I do understand what you're saying. I just don't know that it's necessarily the case. That doesn't mean ignore course design. It means you still, but there may be more than one way. You look at some of the course design principles, and it's like, well, I can see doing it an alternate way. And The other thing that I have to, that I always try to remind myself is that everything changes. Not just in education, but everything changes. So even these course design rubrics that continue to evolve a little bit, the Maryland rubric has changed a lot since 2003. The LSC rubric has changed slightly because they like it, it works for them. But you'll see all these things, and as technology continues to change, as some of the research that we're seeing about online ed, and we are seeing a fair amount of it that is a little bit more broader based, what probably is a little more valid research on student performance and things like that, because a lot of the online research studies were, well, these 30 students did this. So, not necessarily very transferable to anything else. But we're seeing more and more. So what I'm saying is that what this course design rubric looks like today is probably going to look different 5 years from now. 10 years from now, I think it definitely is going to look different. So it kind of goes back, well, if we, so I don't know for sure that matching this rubric is going to lead to higher learning. I'm not going to say it won't, but I won't say for sure that it will. So interesting questions. Fuzzy stuff.
Go back to your first ideal.
Yeah. Just come to this one and just imagine them all colorful instead of black. Okay.
Ideal.
Okay, well, I was going to have you speak about it as if it was. Go for it.
I don't want to throw a monkey wrench into your whole deal here.
No, do it.
I don't teach any online courses, but it seems to me you can get rid of either one of those bottom two triangles there and still achieve quality.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I don't think that's a monkey wrench at all, because I would still say that that top thing is the most important piece. It's about the learning and achieving the outcomes. How you get there, I believe, is not a one-way street. So yeah, I think you could.
And that's going to depend on the student.
Well, it's going to depend on the student. I think to a certain extent, it really also depends on like the program area, your content area, that sort of thing. I'll just give you an example. One of the most correspondence-like courses that was ever at Lake Superior College was a one-credit medical terminology course. You know what? We encouraged her over the years to make it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more activity in it. And she did over time, but for the most part it was kind of a show that you know your medical terms and move on. And so to your point, this was pretty important, and by the way, it wasn't great. It could have been so much better, and eventually was. But this is really important in leading to that. There was very little faculty work during the semester on that course. Okay, so to your point of getting rid of one of those. And on the other one, I think I've already said that. You can have a design that has nothing to do with some sort of rubric. If you have a vision for how you're going to teach these students, and you work at it, and they learn, fabulous as far as I'm concerned. So I'm in agreement with you that you can get rid of one of those boxes. The other piece is, though, that I think that, generally speaking, we tend to live in all three. There's always exceptions. Maybe that faculty member who, the rubric just doesn't fit the way they want to teach. I think that person should be able to prove that they can do this course without it. If you do want that correspondence type course, then, I think that that's entirely possible. It can be done. It's more of a philosophy of how you're going to deliver or offer your learning. So yeah, I think it can be done. I think in most cases, though, you're going to probably try to live in all three boxes. Always exception. And that's one thing I don't like about that kind of approach of using this design rubric as a hammer. And I would probably argue about all of them, is that none of this should preclude somebody from offering a quality education experience that somehow is different than what everybody else is doing. But I've seen that in the case of, okay, so let's back up. I thought one place where Amanda might have been going with her comment, and it turns out that she wasn't, was what students want when it comes to, I'm going to say design, although I'm not so sure design is the right word. Online students, I've heard this from for over a dozen years, think that every course should look alike. Generally speaking, there's always, again, there's always exceptions, but there's a large number of students who take online courses who they take one class, And they go to the second class and say, well, this doesn't look like the first one. And there are schools that in fact make their classes all look alike. They use templates, not just a rubric, but they use templates that every course will look alike except, you know, what the words say, kind of thing. Well, quite frankly, a lot of students kind of like that. Quite frankly, I don't know why. I'm not so sure that that prepares them for anything else that they're going to do in life. I'm not so sure that it's at all similar to what we do on ground. Everybody say, well, but you come into a room and they all look alike. Well, no, clearly they don't all look alike, but they're also not confusing, right? You walk into this classroom compared to the next one, well, you understand that you sit in a chair and that you look at the board and, you know, all those kinds of things. So because they have done that for however many years, you know, 13 plus years of their life already, they understand. They walk into a classroom and they know how it works. They go into their second online classroom and they expect it to be just like the first one. Well, that's like expecting, you know, the Yahoo website to be just like the MSN website. Well, they aren't, you know. And I would argue that courses don't have to be either. That doesn't mean that they should be so completely different you can't tell you're still in the classroom. That's maybe way to the extreme.
As you alluded to, if you do active learning in the on-site classroom, a lot of students are really
I know.
they want this.
Yeah. Same kind of thing here. All right, well, let's talk about some other things that are oftentimes talked about when dealing with quality. So one has to do with course completion or success rates or whatever you want to talk about, whether you're talking about completion of courses, retention or persistence, you know, all of those things that we oftentimes mix together as, even though they're different, we mix them together kind of as retention sorts of things. But this is something that gets a lot of play in online learning is questions about completion. Now, I don't want to put this up here for you to read, but if you pay attention to like the Online Chronicle, Inside Higher Ed, there's lots of different publications about education. Almost weekly you'll find things about online learning. It's a hot topic for them. One reason it's a hot topic for them is because they get hundreds of comments on those. Lots of eyeballs. They post something about, you know, GCC getting a grant. Well, you know, they don't get a lot of eyeballs and they don't get a lot of comments. So they like more controversial subjects, and online learning is one of their prized possessions on this. So you'll find things like this on the Chronicle. Community college students perform worse online than face-to-face, which comes from a study done by the CCRC, which is the Community College Research Center. It's part of, I want to say Columbia, but that's just wrong. Yeah, it is. That's just right, Columbia. I had Cornell on my mind, but no, it is Columbia. Okay, so they do a lot of research studies on community colleges. Well, that's their mission, is to do that. And so they put out this publication. There's actually two different publications. First, they studied various colleges in the state of Virginia. Then, just more recently, they studied kind of a longitudinal, like 6-year study or something, the state of Washington. And we're looking at online student completion and persistence in those schools in those states. So a couple of the things out of here. Washington State Community Technical Colleges in the fall of '04. Students were tracked for nearly 5 years until the spring of '09. And this is one of their quotes. Students were more likely to fail or withdraw from online courses than from face-to-face courses. They were slightly but significantly less likely to attain an educational award or transfer to a 4-year institution. Okay, so they put out that research, and all of the news organizations, you know, pick up on it and run with it. It helps to read these things, by the way, to pay attention to what they're saying. Throughout this research report is that term, slightly but significantly less likely. Now remember, these are statisticians, researchers, you know, that kind of thing. So for somebody who is not living in the stats research world, that means I'm really, really sure that there's a very small difference. But that's not what these news articles talk about. These news articles talk about there's a big difference. They don't talk about the evidence shows that there's a small difference, and it seems to be pretty solid You know, there's a couple of percentage points difference. And it doesn't seem to be moving. That's what these reports are saying. Small difference, not a big difference. But when you say the word significant, people think, oh, this is huge. No, it's small, but statistically significant. I know for sure that there's a small difference. So, here's just another one. Online community college students more likely to fail and withdraw. Slightly more likely to fail and withdraw. Inside higher ed, online and incomplete. And these articles get hundreds of comments of, see, I told you online education stinks, and you know, we should shut it down, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're looking for fun reading, the naysayers are an interesting bunch. And there'll always be somebody who comes up, I've been teaching online for 10 years, and I've got this, and I've got that. All right, well, first of all, what are the reasonable expectations for completion rates? Because the assumption appears to be equal, right? That online completion, success, retention, whatever you want to talk about, should be exactly the same as face-to-face. Is that reasonable? How do you know that's reasonable?
Well, if you had, if it fell within
Oh, you're going to talk like a statistician, aren't you?
then it's not. If it's, you know, a small difference, then when you're taking your stats for what your model or your standards are for expectation of completion of a course, if it's, you know, just a significant, if it's just a small difference, that difference will fall within the standard of error and it won't matter anyway.
All right, well, so I have some other slides that I didn't throw in here, but I think we're going to end up talking about them anyway.
What did she say? I didn't hear that.
Well, about is it a small difference comparing the two, or a large difference? And if it's a large difference, you have a problem.
Well, I think you have to look at least what we see here is sometimes they're taking it because that's all that's available rather than what they want to. So
Quality
it's
of
kind
the
of like any
student.
of our students in any class, we have to look at why they're there.
Okay.
And
So now let's just talk about this reasonable. Is it a reasonable expectation to say that completion, or let's just use the word success, whatever you want that to be, success of the online students should be the same level as the success of face-to-face students? Let's just change it. Success of nursing students should be the same success rate as English students. Agree? And if you agree, why? Why does that make sense to you?
Well, it makes sense to me because, you know, you're an English major, yes, the content is different, but the market, somebody said, let's talk about the market, you know, success is determined, or, you know, a measure of success is whether you can use your skill in you know, the future to
Yeah.
make a living.
Okay,
So-
see, I don't disagree with you, however, we're talking about two different kinds of success. So maybe I shouldn't use the word success, and let's talk about course completion. In other words, do you expect the same percentage of nursing students to complete their courses successfully as you do English students to complete their courses successfully?
Well, nursing students might have a higher expectation that.
Okay,
as-
which is kind of my point. I mean, those two
Yeah.
things are not equal, right?
No.
So does anybody walk around and say, well, my God, their completion rate should be the same? GCC completion rate overall, should it be the same as Lake Superior College completion rate? Does that make any sense? You don't expect them going to be wildly different, I suppose, but on what basis would this population necessarily have the same results as that population? But my point is that we can make all kinds of comparisons. Most of them don't make any sense. Why does this one make sense? Because at Lake Superior College, anyway, there was a difference in the two groups. Now, sure, some students take both. But 40% of the online students there, by the way, online ed at Lake Superior College is 32% of the total enrollment. It's a significant thing that they do there. And in that 1/3, basically, of their total enrollment, 40% of those students only go online. And it's a couple thousand a year who only attend Lake Superior College online. Then you've got a lot who do both. And then you've got some who only go to face-to-face. So, you know, you've got all these different groups. But if you're comparing face-to-face completion rates with online completion rates, that 40% who are only online have a very different demographic. They're older, they have more kids, they have more jobs, they have more everything that you think of, most people think of when they talk about online ed. That's why they're online, because they have really full lives. But you think those two groups, I'm not saying you individually, but people think those two groups should have the same completion rates. They don't have the same lives, they don't have the same motivations, they don't have the same anything, just about, but somehow the completion rate should be identical. You know, so my question is, well, why is that? So now if we accept the idea that, yeah, there's no good reason for them to be identical, well, then the question becomes, well, what should they be? You know, how should they be different? Should it be that online learning is going to be a few percentage points lower completion rate? Well, it tends to be. I don't know if it should be or not. I think I can make some sense out of that based on the demographics differences, but, you know, is 2 percentage points good and 5 bad? Who the heck knows?
I just had someone yesterday tell me that she didn't complete a class that was taught pretty much online. It was a computer class, but it was, she had to be having access to the computer, and she worked all day, and the lab hours couldn't accommodate her, so she ended up not completing the class. So, you know, I mean, right there is an example of the kind of things that happen with people who work full-time.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't have a computer at home that has, you know, everything that they need. And that's, right, that's economics and
all of those things. So you can see all of these things where they're going to compare online and face-to-face. I think you always have to keep in mind that you can compare them if you want to, but it is kind of the classic apples and oranges sort of thing. They're not going to be the same because they are starting from different places, different groups of students, and all the things I said. That still doesn't mean that there should be in any, you know, we're still trying to achieve outcomes. We're still trying to educate students and, you know, make them help them persist to graduation. I don't have any slides on this one, but let me just tell you another research thing that, you know, let me see if I can, my brain is slow. I can remember things 20 years ago much better than last week. But so last week I was reading this research report, and it was about actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I was rereading that section because it is in this book that I'm talking about. It's in this Academically Adrift, and as I thought, like the most valuable thing that they said in that book was the question about learning, and that's what they're trying to measure. Are students improving their skills? Are they learning as they're in college? And they're not talking about program learning. They make that very clear. They are talking about the critical thinking, problem solving, those kind of lifelong skills we expect students to improve when they're in college. That's what they're trying to measure. Not do they know nursing content. They're saying they weren't trying to study that at all. Okay. But what they're getting at in this is looking at whether persistence, which would be re-enrolling over and over, you're successfully completing courses and you're persisting in your program, if that leads to enhanced learning, or whether in fact, and that's kind of the way most educators think about it, if we can keep them here the whole time, they'll learn what they're supposed to learn. And what their evidence, they believe, is showing is this the other way around. That if they're learning, they're more likely to persist. Which makes a lot of sense to me when I think about it, but I think I probably fell in the camp of, well, I need them to persist year after year in order for them to learn. And if they're not learning, they're not persisting in the first place. So kind of an interesting turnaround on that. But you'll hear a lot of things about online ed, and I just think that none of those are necessarily the death knell. We need to think about it and talk about it. All right, well, here's another factor that is sometimes brought into the quality equation. Student satisfaction. Go ahead.
If their premise becomes that students have to be learning or feel that they are learning in order to persist, then the definition of quality then must become based on student perception. How then do you begin to set up your classes and measure what you're doing and know that you are meeting the needs?
Yeah.
Perceive.
That's a huge question. That's a very huge question. And I would say that the first part of that is probably the troubling part of the statement. If it's based on student perception, that I perceive that I am learning, therefore I'm going to continue to work on my degree as I continue to learn more. You know, I don't think that's exactly what they're saying, but I can see exactly how, you know, first of all, why you would think of that, and it does make sense to me, at least the way I describe what they're saying. I really think their point is more to that we have evidence that the students are learning. I think that the student has to be aware that they're learning too, that perception piece that you're talking about. But, well, I think that kind of is a mushroom cloud of things to chew on. So good one. But to see now the student perception piece leads right into this, because this is another, you know, I would say iffy concept for a lot of people. But it's oftentimes brought up in the quality conversation about online learning, and you could, I think, say about education as a whole. The question of how satisfied are the students? And so, is satisfaction a measure of quality? I would say, generally speaking, you know, my take is no. But I can see, you know, first of all, there are satisfaction surveys and measures of student satisfaction. I've gotten some useful information out of some of those. We're going to talk about it a little bit here. I've got some useful information over the years out of that. I still don't know that I'm going to put student satisfaction very high on the list of things that make up quality. Do you have any idea whether you've ever used this at GCC? It's a no-level survey called the PSOL, Priority Survey for Online Learners. You may not have, as you're still kind of growing your online offerings. You know, it is not. First of all, let's distinguish. This is not a course evaluation survey. Right? So, for example, we used it 5 different times at Lake Superior College, where everybody taking one or more online courses is invited to submit this survey. So we have 5 years of data based on this, and it's specifically made for online students. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a flavor of it. We're not going to go into great detail, I hope. But they have 26 statements that are used by all students all over the country. I don't know if it's used outside the U.S., but it's used by hundreds of schools in the U.S. And so you do get some national data to compare your own students with. And these 26 statements, they give you both an importance and a satisfaction measurement on. So if you've used, for example, the Noel Levitt Student Satisfaction Inventory, it's the same kind of thing. The CSSE, CCSSE, same kind of thing. Okay, so you do get some comparison benchmarks there on how responsive the faculty are. All right, well, how your college on the quality of online instruction according to your students. So keep in mind that they are answering the survey on the totality of their experience, some of which are brand new online students and some who have been there a couple of years and anywhere in between. So you get this data, and it's okay, but it's not great. By that I mean, first of all, if you're comparing with national data, you know, for example, at Lake Superior College, GCC would be the same kind of thing. You know, Capella and places like that are in the national data. You know, not a comparison factor to make it. But you can get better comparison data. So this is just the basics. There's those 26 priority statements, how important, how satisfied, and then you can add 10 custom statements. Then they give you other information, they ask about overall satisfaction. That's just stuff. You don't need to know all the details. But here's just a couple of examples. One of the statements has to do with whether registration for online courses is convenient. And they say how important it is and how satisfied. Well, the difference in the 2 columns is known as the gap, the achievement gap. Because in theory, you would like them to be as satisfied as they think it's important. And if they're a lot less satisfied than the level of importance they put on it, then you could improve your service, basically, to raise their satisfaction. So that's, you know, a very small gap, a little bit larger gap on online tutoring. But keep in mind that online tutoring is only used by like 15% of the students, or 12 actually at LSE. Then you get something like this, which is really an oddball on these types of surveys, but it happened, I think, every year of the 5 that we used the survey. Statement number 8 says, student-to-student collaborations are useful to me. And they rank that as the lowest in importance of the 26 items, in fact, of 36, because when we added 10, nothing was lower than that. So the lowest of importance to students, but higher satisfaction. So they're kind of like saying, well, I really don't care about this, but you're doing a really good job. Or something like that. You know, we're going to interpret those results however you want to. So that's the kind of information you get out of this. Well, our online, because everybody wants to know, they always want to compare online to on-ground. I already talked about some of the problems with doing that, but they want to know, well, our online students, as a group, are they satisfied? Depends on where you are, because I've seen some results that are different. At LSC, shockingly so, I would say. Because we did use two different surveys, one for on-campus students, that's the Noel Levitt's SSIs, Student Satisfaction Inventory, and then this PSOL. And on there are eight statements that match up, that both groups of students are answering the same statement. And we added 4 more where you could add extra questions, so we actually had 12 of these measures, at least a couple of years. All of the years we had 8 measures, where we could compare what online students said, how satisfied they were, with on-campus students. And so, for example, convenient payment procedures, that's on a 7-point scale, 6.11 is pretty high on that scale, and the on-campus students said 5.36. Here, useful help desk, here, reputation of the institution, online students, and from a statistical analysis, those are very large differences. Now, you can't actually calculate the number of standard deviations because these are 2 separate samples. On-campus students taking one survey, online students taking another. So all you can really do, especially over time, is compare that, yes, that these are consistent responses that we have. All right, well, then there's a couple more I threw on here. Timely faculty feedback, big difference. Clear program requirements, excellent quality of instruction. Of the 12 where we could compare online student response with on-campus student response, there was only one that was basically a dead heat, and that was that online tutoring. That was the tutoring question. Online tutoring for online students, tutoring center on campus for the others. Their satisfaction levels was a 0.01 difference. You know, the 2 columns were identical, basically. All the rest of them look like this. All right, now this is also kind of goofy. Now, in some cases, I think that it's informative, and when you get into things like the quality rubrics and in your instruction manual and stuff, you'll see things about this being a very important piece, and it is a very important piece to students. So when the online students say that they're highly satisfied with the feedback, timeliness of feedback, there's another one about helpfulness of feedback, but the timeliness of feedback, you know, that's a good indication of what your online faculty members are doing. It might be a good indication of what your on-campus faculty members are doing also, you know, but they don't like to talk about that. But then you get into, well, let me back up, like this one. Well, there's only one way to pay. They all use the exact same payment procedure, online only. You can actually walk up to the counter and still pay, but for the most part, it's just not designed to do that. I mean, everybody pays for the same way online. And yet, so it's not like online students have one procedure or process and the on-campus students have a different one and they're a lot less satisfied. No, there's only one procedure. So that's kind of odd. Clear program requirements. So I used to teach accounting. Accounting is available completely online, completely on campus, or a mixture. But there's only one set of program requirements. Doesn't matter if you're an online student or an on-campus student, your program requirements are identical. Satisfaction with the clarity of the program requirements, not identical. So that's kind of weird. And so at least at LSC, which is where all this data comes from, the online students as a bunch were pretty happy, pretty satisfied with the things that were asked on this particular survey compared to the on-campus students. Why? I don't really know. I do think that overall we did a good job with online education, but that doesn't explain some of the rest of this. So, you know, you can make up reasons, which is all we can do because we have no proof of any of this, but we can make up reasons such as, well, you know, those who really need online learning are just so happy to have access to higher ed that, you know, they score you high on these things. That could be as good of an explanation as anything else. I don't know. I don't know how to attribute some of those. And then the fact that you've got these where it's just that much higher to begin with, then it makes you question, you know, is there really a significant difference in the other ones? I don't know. What should we know? Seems odd. Well, the point is that you can get a lot of this data And what I was kind of just asking there was this question, well, what really drives their level of satisfaction? Why would the online students appear to be much more satisfied? I don't know. By the way, I've seen data from other schools that don't necessarily look like that. So you would not expect the exact same thing. But let's just stop for a second there. The question of student satisfaction. Let's change the angle here slightly. Instead of that kind of broad satisfaction survey, what about course evaluations? Is that, even though we don't call it, is that basically a satisfaction survey? Don't usually use the word satisfaction. It's a course eval, but they're kind of expressing their satisfaction with whatever you have on your evaluation form, right? How valid do you think those are?
Ugh.
Yeah, of course. And there's research to back that up. That, you know what? There's all kinds of issues with the data that comes out of those course evaluations.
Depends on when you give it.
Depends on almost everything under the sun. And we know that. Now, you know, my kind of take on all of that is, yes, I understand that the data that comes out of those is only sometimes useful. Because sometimes it is. But even if it was never useful, I think you still have to do it. It's one of the few, and in some cases the only, chance that the student has a voice in what's going on. Now that doesn't mean, give them a voice and then throw them in the garbage. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it's important for the students to have that opportunity. And when they don't have the opportunity, that's when they create things like Rate Your Professors and stuff like that. It's like, well, I want the opportunity. My college isn't giving me the opportunity, type of thing. So I think it's important, but I don't think it's always useful. And there are lots of, and that's one area where there's a whole ton of research on the validity of those classroom evals. And as you know, anybody's done it, you know that there's all kinds of problems that could happen. All right. We're going to wrap up in 5 to 10 minutes and take a break here. I've got just a couple of things else I want to talk about. This one is still part of the PSOL, but the idea of, I've got a little slide here, a little series here before I get back to the PSOL. What do they expect from online learning? New student coming into online learning, what do you think they expect? Anybody?
My
My
students,
students expect it to be easier.
yeah,
Okay.
that's,
Mainly? Well, and one question I would ask is, where do you think they've shaped these expectations? Because they haven't taken one before, right? They're a new online student, so these ideas come from, it's the same slide. But here's another slide from the PSOL. This is one of their summary statements, and the students are asked, so far, how has your college experience met your expectations? And on average, this was the last year, 2009, the overall, the mean was 5.0, which is better than I expected. And you can see that there's some much better, you can see a couple down here much worse. Okay, so that data came out of that same survey. Overall, or not overall, so far, how has your college experience, remember this is your online college experience because they know they're taking an online student survey. How has it met your expectations?
Can they clarify what they mean by, can you go back one?
Huh?
Sorry. College experience?
Well, again, it's not about any particular class.
Well, I
So
didn't know
your
if it was academic
online
learning.
learning experience at this
So they're
college.
talking about academics only, because if their college experience means how many times did I get to get drunk this week?
They are-
Then that's a different
No,
experience.
well, see, that's the problem with some of these surveys. That exactly what you say, because how the student interprets that is what it means to that student. What they mean, I believe, is a sum total of all of the things that we've asked you already in the survey. That's what I think Noel Levitz is getting at. That doesn't mean that's what students are answering. Students could be answering what you are. Hey, I'm online. That means I can stay home in my pajamas and drink all day. It's
Because
fabulous.
a lot of students think that the college experience includes, but is not limited to,
Absolutely right.
partying and having friends and
Absolutely
doing
right.
stuff.
So that's a problem with these types of questions, is how you phrase them. But let's say, just for the argument right now, that that's not an issue, which it is an issue. But let's just say that that's not an issue. Remember it was, how have we met your expectations? All right, well, what are their expectations? You know? Because if they, back 1 second here, if they expected it to totally stink, well, gee, we did better than that. If they thought it was going to be the most fabulous experience of their life, Well, for some of them, it's even better, much better. But obviously, that's what makes it. Knowing what their expectations are is the key to this thing of seeing whether you exceeded those expectations or not. There's no information in here about what they expected. But just kind of anecdotally from dealing with students along the lines, we do find that a lot of them expect it to be easy and quick. I shouldn't have to spend a lot of time doing this.
Yeah.
And I can have my book in front of me.
A lot of them believe it will be independent study. It's online. Remember that one thing about group work, or student-to-student collaboration, which is basically group work? They don't see that coming. Like, why would I want to do that? I'm online. I'm by myself. Well, it could be, but that's not the way a lot of places do it. They expect to be extremely flexible. That's the number one reason they take these courses is time flexibility. I kind of added this one myself because it's like, oh, it's really a regular schedule? I have to follow a regular schedule? I should just be able to do this class whenever the heck I want.
Which typically means the 2 days
Before
before.
it's over. So they should also expect disappointment. Because it's supposed to be hard. It's college. And if they're coming with those expectations that it's not going to be hard and it's not real college and I'm just going to somehow get credits and stuff, they should be disappointed. And if they're not, then you have a problem. But I don't think you do. And so we need to communicate to them what those expectations should be. And so I'm going to wrap up here in a couple minutes with a little bit more about this expectations question, because I find it really important to clarify, and that's one thing that this instructional manual that is brand new for GCC, it helps clarify a lot of those expectations, especially the faculty expectations. So we have, and when I say we, I mean you can talk about kind of the college in general, you can talk about the administration, but for the most part it's the same thing with faculty. They have certain expectations of what they, of what constitutes quality online learning or any education experience. So the question is, how clearly have you communicated those expectations, and are they easy to find? So at LSC, my last year there, we did a little project that dealt with the first two of these, and the third one was kind of, not by osmosis, but it was framed by the first two anyway. But we were dealing with, first we made a formal list, and that sounds kind of weird, but so much of the stuff is kind of out there in the ether. Well, we have these expectations, but you can't really put your finger on them anywhere. And so what students should expect from the college, and what the college expects from students who are going into online learning. And those pages are posted on the website, and students are linked to them before they take classes and stuff like that. And they have other things like you do. You have online student orientations and stuff like that. But it's a clear set of expectations. One other thing that does is it can take the burden off a lot of the faculty members so that they don't all have to develop their own expectations in those areas. But at the same time, they can supersede if they want to. So there will be expectations on that list of student expectations of, say, textbooks, for example. And if the faculty member is happy with kind of the college-wide expectations of get your textbooks early and often and all that kind of thing, all they do is really either copy or point to the same data. If they want to have different information about what happens if you don't have your textbook for this class, then they put it in their syllabus as their own guidance. But basically we thought that there's just too much fuzzy stuff. 12, 14 years down the road, all of these things that we expected to happen, but if somebody said, well, can you show me that list? I said, well, there is no list. So we made a list. And especially on this one, for faculty, what faculty should expect from the college, support and other things, but what the college expects from faculty who are teaching online courses. So I'll just give you a flavor of this. Some of this is the type of thing that's in your instructional manual. One reason this came up is one of our very first online faculty members, and a great online faculty member from day one at LSC, said this to me one day. What do you mean my classes have to be interactive? Never heard that. Are you kidding me? For 10 years, that's been like the mantra, I thought. And then you think, well, just look around. All the people sitting in the room today, if we talked about importance of interaction in online learning, everybody in this room has at least heard it once, right? Are there people not in this room right now? There are, aren't there? That for whatever reason, they're not here today. So they're not hearing the thing about importance of interaction. And then maybe the next time it's spoken, well, there's different people who aren't there. And it's like, how could you not know this? It's like, well, I've never heard you say that. then I think we need to write it down, kind of thing. Well, that's one place where a rubric, or in your case you have kind of a checklist in your manual, a rubric helps inform some of those expectations. This is part of the LSC rubric, and it's right here in the standards. So this is part of the course design piece, that little triangle that we're talking about. It says, course design provides learning activities to foster instructor-to-student, content-to-student, which, by the way, I totally disagree with, but forget it, and if appropriate, student-to-student interaction. I just don't think you can interact with inanimate objects like content. That's just me. That's a term. I don't think interact is the right term. Okay, enough of that rate. But student-to-student and instructor-to-student, human-to-human interaction, we're saying we expect that to happen. You can get a waiver, basically. If we are going to have a correspondence course of medical term, then yeah, there's not going to be interaction, and we'll sign off on that and say, okay, no, don't worry about it. But that would be very few and far between, because that's the general expectation, unless you have a different idea. Float your idea, see what happens. But so that's one thing. The rubric is set up to say, we expect this, and by the way, because it's a three-pointer, it's really important. But even that only goes so far. Think of the three triangles again. It's in the course design, but did it really happen? That's a different piece. Course design says it should happen. In most likely the teaching evaluation piece, we'd find out, did it happen? And it's usually pretty easy to find. It's pretty easy to see when it happens. There's evidence that the instructor is interacting, and that there are things set up that not only set up for students to interact, but that they have project reports, or they did things, and there's evidence of that they in fact did that. So all of these things you can say, well, we have this feedback policy or expectation. I prefer that over policy, but whatever. Did they actually do it? You won't necessarily know about all of their feedback, nor should you. That's just not important. So the point being that, yeah, you can put those things in the design rubric. That's one way of communicating, but then there still needs to be some sort of kind of a follow-up sort of thing. I think I'm going to find a stopping point here. So 1 second, bear with me. And because I had a bunch of junk here I didn't think I'd get to, but I had it just in case we needed it. So I think this is where I'd rather stop. And when we come back with a kind of a totally different topic, but I want to wrap up this idea of quality and from GCC perspective, from the college perspective. Why are you engaged in e-learning? What's the value? What are the benefits to the school? What are the benefits to the students? In other words, what are the driving factors? I'm just curious, and you don't have to actually have that whole conversation since it's break time, but have you had that conversation? Large or small group type of conversation? I mean, is that something that you discuss?
I would say, we've sort of had loose conversations, and that's kind of why we're here.
Okay.
It's been a couple of years in the making, essentially, to really look at the value of online learning, the value of offering a broader range, the whole symbolic thing you showed about quality from an instructor and design and learning perspective, and trying to find a way to align all of those as best that we can, and having, the manual was, a year in the making.
Yep.
And so we're at a point where, the value in e-learning is demonstrated through these activities, and that we see that there's value in it. We need to structure it in a more, in a stronger way.
Okay.
Why are we engaged in it? Because there's a market for it. Because we have, an off-campus area where we have students who find this to be a more convenient way of learning. And everyone's kind of, engaged in that at different levels.
Yeah. This thing here, I think, is what you were just saying there at the end. Hopefully, you're doing it to make a difference. I will tell you that my years at Lake Superior College working in e-learning, why I got out of bed in the morning and went to work was because it was providing access to students who otherwise just didn't have it. Sure, there were other students who didn't need online learning who were taking advantage of it for various reasons, but there were those who, and I would get letters every year from some of those, maybe not every year, I got quite a few of them over the years of the kind that the student is telling you that you made a difference in their life by giving them an opportunity to learn, and that they wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise. That's pretty important stuff. It also happens here too, but it's just one more opportunity to reach out and touch them. So I think rather than discussion time, it's break time. And if we go about 15 minutes, that would be great, and I'll get geared up for a different kind of